Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. David Bahnsen is the head of the Bahnsen Group. He is one of our go-to guys for news and analysis on economic matters. How are you, David?
I'm doing great, Hugh. How are you?
Good. I talked to Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, at the start of the show, and I asked him, what do you think about tariffs? And he said, I've thought about this for many years, and the natural law does not speak to me on tariffs. He said Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, they were in favor of tariffs. And I kind of like the tariffs on China, but I'm a free trader generally. David, what do you think the president was doing last weekend?
Well, it's complicated because I want so badly to talk about tariffs as an economic matter, and President Trump is using them as a political matter to advance a domestic policy agenda. And so it becomes very complicated when we're talking about the effectiveness of getting concessions from Canada and Mexico around border security, drug trafficking, immigration, things in those categories, which is, of course, a separate category from the reality of tariffs as an impediment to trade. So when we talk about tariffs, Hugh, in the context of using them to protect American workers, I vehemently disagree. When we see things play out with Colombia, with what you saw on Monday with Mexico and Canada, which I hope yields some substantive fruit, I don't think the president is in this for a mere cosmetic victory, and I'm certainly not advocating for that. But if you get something substantive, that can be a positive thing. I just want people economically to understand because I'm a nerd and I can't be the political negotiating talent that Donald Trump is. I and my core want people to understand that tariffs are a tax that come at a cost, and therefore it's a trade-off. And you can think it's worth it or you can think it's not worth it, but it does come at a cost.
Now, you are, David, like me, a professional communicator. And I understood everything that Donald Trump did in the first week on tariffs to be part of the messaging effort, not to reach the Mexican government, the Canadian government, or the Chinese government, but to reach people who might be about to give their life savings and the savings of their family to a coyote to bring them to North America. I think he was messaging to the world, stop, because everything I've got, I'm going to throw at stopping you. What do you make of my assessment?
Hugh, I struggle with because I've given up on being able to always understand what may be in the president's mind, and I don't have the ability to assume he's always playing. What are we up to now? 7-dimensional chess or
Oh, I
something?
don't. I think
And
it's
I
very
also,
one-dimensional chess. I think it's a giant
well,
stop sign.
yeah. Look, I agree with you that he is laser focused on border security. Hugh, my own personal opinion is that we're going to get a lot of his domestic policy agenda done as it pertains to the border. And I'm going to be very happy about it, and you're going to be happy about it. I do not believe that that requires us to say things like tariffs can replace the income tax or that we're getting ripped off in a trade deal with Canada. But if it's all messaging and it's all negotiating, I have given up on trying to criticize his messaging. He's better at it than I am, and I humbly acknowledge that.
Okay, I do too. In fact, I wrote a column for Fox News today that I like your tone, David. A lot of people who hate tariffs adopt the terms of psychiatric uh, disorder to describe Donald Trump, and then I turn them off because they're not serious. Your tone is, I don't like tariffs. I hope he's doing messaging and not tariffs. I want to know about the EU. The EU, I'm going to talk with Philip Alboni, who does the Global Post. They want to regulate AI. They want to screw up our leading edge technology sector vis-a-vis China. What do you think we should do with the EU, which is all about regulation and ruining us?
See, Hugh, this is where I want to be very clear about category distinction. Who is the we? I don't believe that American companies necessarily need the White House negotiating the terms of those engagements. So, to the extent the European Union wants to put cumbersome and burdensome regulation on American companies, I think the American companies should refuse to play ball or should do their own risk reward calculations. I think they have the knowledge and they have the incentives to determine what makes the most sense for their particular enterprise. And I do not believe that the White House, regardless of who might be president, would have that. The European Union is trying to regulate businesses to the tune of their own economic growth suffering for decades, while our economic growth has flourished, particularly in these categories, whether it be semiconductors, technology, digitization, and I'm sure AI belongs in that list. They are behind in all these elements, and the biggest victims of their regulatory apparatus are their own member countries.
I agree with all that, but I want to go back to the issue at hand. Laissez-faire approach to this would allow the American companies to duel with the EU bureaucrats. That might A, cost them market share, B, penalize Europeans, and C, set back the market capitalization and growth that we need to maintain our lead over China. If that is the case, does it move from an economic issue to a national security issue? And I don't know whether it is, but if it is, does it move to that category?
No, I mean, Hugh, you and I are conservatives. Larry Arnn, who you had on earlier, is one of the great promoters of what I'm about to say I've ever heard. We believe in limiting principles. And if we say that some letdown and laissez-faire in a matter of a market negotiation becomes a national security issue every time, there's no limiting principle. Obviously, there's a national security concern when you're talking about certain products, when you're talking about the defense and aerospace industry, et cetera. So I'm not being hardline about this, but I do want there to be a high bar where we think that the White House can negotiate a deal for Intel better than Intel can, or whatever. I'm using them as a random example. They don't seem to be very good at negotiating their own deals, by the way. But that's a market comment. That's a market comment, not a political comment, right? Hugh, I don't think that the market capitalization of American companies goes down if they negotiate their own deals with the European Union. I think the aggregate market capitalization goes up because some companies say, no, we won't play ball. Some companies say, yes, they will. And they all operate in their own self-interest. And that is what I believe as a classical.
Quick limiting principle. Isn't the limiting principle, it's non-falsifiable, so it's not really a principle, but isn't the limiting principle is given all the knowledge that the government knows, if they say national security, we have to go along with their assertion until it's manifestly not true?
No, that is not my limiting principle or the limiting principle of our founding father.
Oh, I think you might be off there, David Bahnsen. Come back and we'll talk more about that. I believe the framers intended the chief executive to have energy of all sorts, and they were all protectionists. Every one of them was a I'm not a you're not, but every one of the framers were. Thank you, David.